Hi guys, welcome to a Lanterna education video for English IB tutoring. Today we are going to cover how to nail your English IB paper 1. This is part 1 of 2 videos, and today we're focusing on how to analyse a poem, okay, which can be very tricky for a lot of students, but there is a pretty good formula which you can follow, and I'm confident that will really help you guys out in the exam. So, to start with, before we even think about how to analyse a poem, we need to understand the assessment objectives, okay? Now this is what the examiner really wants to see from us and the student in the exam. So, for English paper 1, students have to show that they have an interpretation of the text, right? Now especially with poems, nothing is objective here, right? So no interpretation is wrong as such. The key thing is that you just back up your ideas, right? And you back up your ideas by providing evidence. And this is absolutely key. So you need to figure out why you're going to choose things like the writer's choice of language, structure, technique, and style to support your argument. So for structure, this is things like use of punctuation, right? The length of verses. Are they short sentences or are they long sentences? The writer's choice of language, think about if they use a lot of imagery, or is it very emotive? Is it more factual? Are the words long or the words short? Is there onomatopoeia? Things like that. And their technique and style. What's the overall tone of the passage? Is it a happy passage? Is it a sad passage? Are they trying to maybe transmit some kind of message here? And finally, what they really want to see is that you've thought about the structure of your essay, okay? So you need to make sure your ideas are organised coherently into paragraphs. But that's getting into the territory of planning an essay, and we'll cover that in the next video. For now, we'll just get on with the poem. So, this video will cover how to analyse a poem for paper 1, okay? And we'll first look at how to approach a poem, and then we'll figure out how to really analyse our evidence that we collect. So, there are several steps for approaching the poem. The first thing, you need to read the poem, particularly the title and caption, before you even read the body. And you need to think what the poem is literally about. So in this case, I can see it's the Ballad of Birmingham. And it's about the bombing of a church in Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. Already, I'm thinking about what's going on in Alabama in the deep south of America in 1963. Obviously, there's a lot of racial tension, and this is around the time where there's lots of activism for civil rights. So I already know before I even read the poem that there is some important context to bear in mind. But now we can go ahead and read it. Mother dear, may I go downtown, instead of out to play, and march the streets of Birmingham in a freedom march today? No, baby, no, you may not go, for the dogs are fierce and wild, and clubs and hoses, guns and jail aren't good for a little child. But mother, I won't be alone, and other children will go with me, and march the streets of Birmingham to make our country free. No, baby, no, you may not go, for I fear those guns will fire, but you may go to church instead, and sing in the children's choir. She has combed and brushed her night dark hair and bathed rose petal sweet, and drawn white gloves on her small brown hands and white shoes on her feet. The mother smiled to know her child was in the sacred place, but that smile was the last smile to come upon her face. For when she heard the explosion, her eyes grew wet and wild. She raced through the streets of Birmingham, calling for her child. She clawed through bits of glass and brick, then lifted out a shoe. Oh, here's the shoe my baby wore, but baby, where are you? And that's by Dudley Randall, The Ballad of Birmingham, published in 1969. So, immediately we've read the poem, and we understand what's happened at least. This little girl is talking to her mother because she wants to go and protest for her civil rights. The mother cautions against this because she wants to protect her child, so instead she sends her to a church. But tragically, the poem ends because the church gets bombed and the daughter dies anyway, even though her mother was trying to protect her from this danger. Okay? So, like we said, we need to write this succinctly, and we need to understand this in short sentences so we can communicate it easily when we come to write it. So this poem is about a young girl who wants to participate in a march for civil rights in 1960s Alabama. Her mother tries to protect her from the danger of protesting, so instead sends her to church. Tragically, this causes her death as the church is bombed. So it's key when you're trying to practice for these exams and for analysing a poem that you're able to just write down really succinctly what actually happens in the course of the poem, what physically is occurring, what is the story, before you even need to think about any kind of deeper meaning. Now, the second thing to do when you're analysing this poem is read it again and underline all the images, words, punctuation, structural features, things like that you think are important to the poem, and how these help the poem gain their meaning. For example, we know that this poem is a ballad, right, which is a type of song, sung in verse. So we can think about how the rhyme scheme affects this. In addition, we can think about things like imagery, okay? So maybe we're thinking about how the young girl and her young age are really emphasized, right? With her small brown hands and her being rose petal sweet. She seems very much like a child, okay? But there are other things, such as lots of direct speech. So the first 4 stanzas are all composed of a conversation between the mother and the daughter. It's very back and forth. As I said, there's a frequent use of rhyme and there's lots of repetition. No, baby, no, you may not go. That's repeated quite a lot throughout the poem. Think about maybe there's some significance in that. There's also lots of sensory imagery. So sound, sight, smell, things like that. The smell of rose petal sweet, the sound of the explosion, things like that. And all these work together and are deliberately put in by the poet. So as the student, we need to look at them and we need to think, what's important about them? Why have they been put in? And the structure of the verse, finally, is also regular. It's always 4 lines, and there's a regular rhyme scheme as well. So, the thing to do now is to think about the deeper meaning of the poem, okay? So, is there a moral to this kind of story? And I think it's quite clear from this that there is. Now, a great way to do this is to examine the start and the end of the poem, okay? So what was the situation at the start of the poem and how has this actually changed by the end of the poem? Is there some kind of moral to the story? In this poem, the mother is clearly seeking to protect her child from discrimination and from oppression by sending her to the safety of the church. However, she's killed anyway, in a moment that's really quite ironic. So we start to think, as a student and as a reader, why has this happened? Why is the author showing us a mother trying to protect her daughter, but this attempt actually failing? Now, it's clearly because he wants to transmit some kind of message about safety and about protest. A key theme then is irony, and that hiding from oppression does not avoid it, and it doesn't ensure your security. So, that gives you a base understanding of the kind of way we collect evidence, the kind of way we think about what's literally happened in the poem, and how we figure out a deeper meaning to it, a moral to the story, right? Think about poems kind of like lullabies or fairy tales. These always try to transmit a message to a child, right? And poems try to do the same thing, but in a far more complicated way with the adult. And I promise you, no matter how confusing the poem seems like it is, it will have some kind of message to transmit to you. So, on to how we analyse our evidence. First thing is to think about our PQAL. Now, you may have seen this before as PEEL or some similar format from your English teacher, but what PQAL means is point, quote, analysis, link. So, the brief given by paper 1 for high level is just to write a commentary. For standard level, you'll sometimes get some hints. The hints in this, or prompts as they're called on the paper, were to focus on the use of irony in the passage and how the form of the poem affects its meaning. Form just means structure. Okay, so we could think about rhyme scheme in that context, or we could think about sentence length, things like that. But given that we just have to write a commentary, it means we need to show how the author communicates this deeper meaning, right? That's what it means to just write a commentary. For this, we need to analyse individual quotes, okay? And we do this using our PQAL structure, which stands for point, quote, analysis, and link. So, let's start with P, point, right? Now, this is how you introduce the quote that you're about to use, and you show its importance in your argument. You just need to sort of ask yourself, how does the following quote relate to the point of my paragraph, okay, to the theme we're writing about? So, say we're writing a paragraph on structure, and part of what we're talking about is how there's lots of repetition in the passage. Our point, and the way we introduce this, is to say, The use of repetition in the passage contributes to the irony of the poem, as it creates a sense of safety and intimacy between the mother and the child, okay? So it's this repetition of, no baby, no, you may not go. We understand that the mother is using very endearing terms towards her daughter. They clearly have an informal, quite close relationship. And then we say that this literary form of repetition adds to the meaning of the entire poem because it's ironic that they're so close, but that the mother fails to protect her daughter. Now on to Q, so the quote. We then choose the quote that's most appropriate to back this point up. Okay, so we think about where's repetition and what's most important in terms of repetition in this passage. Now, make sure when you're quoting that it's not too long. You don't want to really be quoting more than sort of 2 lines, absolute max. And you should also place the quote within a sentence instead of just having it on its own. For example, we introduce it by saying the repetition of, and then we embed the quote in a sentence, quote, no baby, no, you may not go, end quote, and then we say that this suggests that. So this is how we introduce our quote before moving on to analysis. This is when we really pick the quote apart, okay? And we focus on picking out individual things. So we label things like the noun baby, right, which is very informal, very close language. Or we can pick out a verb, an adjective, a metaphor, a simile, use of onomatopoeia, or alliteration, things like that, other literary features. And you really need to make sure that you actually use this terminology. An examiner doesn't just want to hear you say, this word does this. They want to know that you know what kind of word, what kind of literary technique it is. Ask yourself if there's punctuation used, if it affects the pace of the poem or the mood. And finally, once you have identified your literary feature, you should say what it either conveys or illustrates, depicts, iterates, instead of just what it shows. Again, the more sophisticated our language is throughout the essay, the better it comes off to the examiner and the higher chance we have of really pushing into that top grade boundary. For example, here, when we're analysing, we say this repetition of no baby, no, you may not go suggests that the child is patient, so the mother is patiently talking to her child and protecting her without anger. The short words, note we've identified something, and internal line rhyme, we've identified another literary feature, give a gentle rhythm to the line, whilst the intimate term baby comforts the reader. Okay, so this is us analysing the repetition of this phrase and what kind of impact it has, that it makes us feel, or it should make the child feel safe. And then finally we have our link. Okay, so why is this idea of the child feeling safe and secure contributing to the main point of the poem, to this idea of irony? And therefore we explain how, in this way, due to this, the author furthers this idea of irony. For example, this atmosphere of intimacy is ironic due to the child's death later on in the poem. The mother's protection has been useless. Hence, the author uses structure to further the sense of irony in the poem and to illustrate how it is futile to stay neutral as a victim of oppression. Okay? So, we really clearly see how this quote makes us think about irony and makes us feel, right? It transmits a sense of intimacy. But overall, when we take a step back in the context of the whole poem, this is very ironic. So, finally, these ideas need to be grouped so you can actually write an essay on this topic, right? So this is sort of the planning stage that you would do in the exam. You'd spend about half an hour of your time planning the essay before you even put any pen to paper. Okay, so remember there's absolutely no rush, and it's really worth spending your time making sure you get quality analysis and a quality plan. So, to that end, in the next video, we're looking at how to actually put together an essay and how to structure one around this poem, okay? So, like I said, it's covered in the following video, so you can just click on the link below to access that, or you can also get in touch with us at Lanterna Education to check out our online private tuition. I've been Finn, thank you very much for watching, guys, and hopefully I might even see one or two of you soon. Alright, bye-bye.